There is a strange question hidden inside the Bible. If God created everything, then who created Satan? And if Satan was created by God, was he always evil? The answer appears to be no. In fact, according to some of the oldest descriptions in Scripture, Satan may have once been one of the most powerful, beautiful, and trusted beings in all of creation. So what happened? What could cause a being that existed in the presence of God to become God's greatest enemy? And perhaps more importantly, what does that story reveal about human nature? To answer that, we have to go back to a time before humanity existed, before Adam, before Eve, before sin entered the world. Because according to the biblical story, there was a time when Satan wasn't a rebel. There was a time when he wasn't a tempter. There was a time when he wasn't even Satan as most people imagine him today. And that may be one of the most misunderstood stories in the entire Bible. Most people picture Satan as a horned demon ruling over hell. But the Bible never actually describes him that way. No horns, no red skin, no pitchfork. Many of those images came centuries later through art, literature, and folklore. The earliest descriptions are far stranger. One of the most debated passages appears in the book of Ezekiel. The passage is addressed to the king of Tyre, but many theologians throughout history have believed the language points beyond a human ruler to something greater. Listen to how this figure is described. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Think about that for a moment. Perfect in beauty. Not corrupted, not fallen, not evil, beautiful. The passage continues. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Then it describes precious stones covering him. Ruby, topaz, diamond, emerald, onyx, sapphire. The language feels almost overwhelming, like the writer is struggling to describe something beyond ordinary human experience. But here's where the story becomes strange. The passage doesn't simply describe beauty, it describes status, power, responsibility. The figure is called an anointed guardian cherub. Today, many people imagine cherubs as small winged babies floating on clouds. The Bible describes something very different. Cherubim are among the most powerful beings associated with the presence of God. When Adam and Eve were expelled from Eden, cherubim guarded the entrance. When Moses constructed the Ark of the Covenant, cherubim were placed above it as symbols of God's throne. These were not minor beings. They occupied positions of extraordinary significance. And if Ezekiel is describing Satan before his fall, then he may have stood closer to the presence of God than almost any other created being. He wasn't an outsider looking in. He wasn't hiding in darkness. He was already at the center. And that's what makes the story so difficult to understand. Because if Satan truly occupied such a position, then he already possessed everything most beings would desire: power, beauty, purpose, influence. So why rebel? We'll come back to that. Because before we can understand the fall, we have to understand what was lost. One of the most fascinating details in the passage is what comes next. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created. Blameless. The Bible does not describe Satan as being created evil. It describes him as being created good. That creates a problem many people have never considered. If evil wasn't created, where did it come from? And if a perfect being could fall, what does that mean for everyone else? The Bible doesn't immediately answer those questions. Instead, it gives us fragments, hints, pieces scattered across different books. And when those pieces are placed together, a pattern begins to emerge. Another important passage appears in Isaiah. Again, the immediate context concerns a human king. But suddenly the language shifts. How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn. The phrase morning star was later translated into Latin as Lucifer. It simply means light bearer. Think about that name. Light bearer. Not destroyer. Not adversary. Light bearer. Even the title itself suggests a position of honor before the fall. Then the passage reveals something critical. Not an action, not a battle, a thought. I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will make myself like the Most High. Notice how the rebellion begins. No war, no violence, no armies, just an idea, a desire, a belief that something higher could be taken. And this is where the story becomes uncomfortable, because the first sin described in Scripture may not have been murder, or greed, or hatred. It may have been pride, the desire to place yourself at the center, the desire to become your own highest authority. But here's the part most people overlook. Satan didn't seek power because he lacked power. He already had it. He didn't seek status because he lacked status. He already had it. That's what makes the story terrifying. The rebellion wasn't driven by emptiness. It was driven by wanting more than was ever meant to belong to him. And that pattern appears everywhere. History is filled with powerful people who already possessed wealth, influence, and success, yet destroyed themselves reaching for more. The higher someone rises, the more dangerous pride becomes. Perhaps that's why this story continues to resonate thousands of years later. Because it doesn't feel ancient. It feels familiar. But the story wasn't over. According to the book of Revelation, a conflict eventually emerges in heaven itself. A great dragon appears. A war breaks out. Michael and his angels fight against the dragon and his followers. The dragon is cast down, the ancient serpent, the devil, Satan. Scholars debate exactly how these passages should be interpreted. Some see them as symbolic, others see them as literal. Others see them as both. But the central theme remains remarkably consistent. A rebellion occurred, and it failed. The being who sought to elevate himself lost the position he already possessed. And perhaps that is the greatest irony in the entire story. The very thing Satan wanted became the thing that cost him everything. Before we continue, if you're enjoying these biblical mysteries, consider subscribing. Many of the strangest stories in Scripture are the ones most people have never heard. Now here's the question that matters. Why does any of this matter today? Because beneath all the supernatural imagery lies a deeply human lesson. The story is not ultimately about a throne, it's about temptation. Not the temptation to do evil, the temptation to become the center of everything, to believe that limits no longer apply, to place ourselves above the purpose we were created for. And maybe that's why the story has survived for so long. Not because people are fascinated by demons, but because they recognize something of themselves in the pattern. The desire for more, the struggle with pride, the belief that fulfillment lies one step beyond what we already have. According to the biblical story, Satan's downfall wasn't caused by weakness. It was caused by refusing to accept that even extraordinary power has limits. And if that is true, then the story is much bigger than a fallen angel. It's a warning, one that echoes through history, one that appears in kingdoms, corporations, families, and individual lives. Because long before humanity existed, a being described as beautiful, wise, powerful, and blameless asked a dangerous question. What if I belonged on the throne? And according to the Bible, the consequences of that question are still unfolding today.